Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Deviant Mind. This is your host, Dominika.
And I'm Chris.
And we are coming to you with part 2 of Larry Ray, who was part of, or he was the instigator of the Sarah Lawrence. Some places call it sex cult, but it really wasn't a sex cult except for one of the students he had kind of forced into prostitution. Well, I guess that's not true because he had all the other people having sex with each other. So, and anyway, in some of the papers, it reads as the Sarah Lawrence sex cult. In others, it just calls it the Sarah Lawrence cult. So this is part 2, and we are going into who Larry Ray was and his crazy history that almost sounds like it's totally fake. And though it's not, because reputable papers like the New York Times and the New Yorker or the New York Magazine have reported on it. So I have to assume that they did their research. I did find the court documents, and some of the court documents mentioned some of this as well. And of course, he was put to jail for some of these things. So, but yeah, stranger than fiction.
I mean, the big bust, I guess, was is it 2020 when he's brought in for the cult, everything with the cult? Because it must have been, right? Because prior to that was the other. Was that a kidnapping charge because he was not supposed to be with his daughter, and he kind of ran off with the daughter?
Yes. Yeah, so there was a charge for that, but he was also indicted in March of $2000. In March of 2000, federal prosecutors, federal prosecutors in Brooklyn indicted 19 defendants, including Larry, for their involvement in a securities fraud scheme, which we will go into. He was an informant for the FBI during this investigation. And he was also indicted for it. And he also was an informant on one of his, I guess you could say, colleagues, a man named Di Tomasio. He ran a construction business. So we will get into that as well.
A construction business.
But I think, in New York. So, I mean, I'm sure.
Mafia.
Go ahead. The mafia. I mean,
I was just going to say, it's the mafia.
When I was doing, it's the mafia. It's the mafia. And, he does have the investigative journalists from The Cut, which is the New York magazine, not New Yorker magazine. They did interview somebody who was at his wedding that claimed a capo from the Genovese family, Salvatore Sally Dogs Lombardi, attended his wedding in 1988. So, I mean, this guy ran in
to the Gambino crime family.
And of course, to Rudy Giuliani, because...
Giuliani and then Carrick. I mean, it's really funny because he winds up playing everybody. He's kind of informant not only to the feds or whomever else, but also to the mafia. I mean, he mingles with everyone and then he reports back to the Gambino family and he's like, look, so he's, and up until he gets arraigned, he's a liar. I mean, that's his thing, is his liar and his belief in his background, which so much of it is fabricated. There was this, he claims to be related to Al Capone.
Yeah, he does. Because of course, I mean, why not? He was diagnosed with histrionic personality disorder as well as narcissistic personality disorder by the courts. Now, earlier we had talked about the fact that during his case, with his ex-wife in the custody battle, there was a psychological examiner who was part of that battle and said that, and this is a quote, is able to manipulate, and this is talking about Larry Ray, quote, is able to manipulate and control almost any situation in which he finds himself, including a psychological interview with a forensic examiner, no matter how experienced that examiner may be. Mr. Ray is very good at what he does, and he can be utterly charming, and one can be disarmed by his childlike simplicity and smile. But Mr. Ray is no child. He is a calculating, manipulative, and hostile man. End quote. And this is from a psychological examiner during his custody battle. And, what was interesting is I always look for what happened in these people's childhoods to make them the deviant minds as they are.
Yes.
And I honestly could not find anything about him outside of the fact that he was born as... Oh, you did? Tell me, please.
So, born 1959 in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. And his original name is Larry Greco.
Yeah.
So he changes his names. His parents get divorced, and that's when he took his stepdad's last name. It's actually Ray is actually his stepfather's last name. He apparently had some issues growing up. I believe that the divorce did have some kind of impact. Perhaps there was a lot of lying in that household, to a point where he just totally decides to remove himself and spends only 19 days in the military. He signs up 19 days, and then he's actually let go by the military. And I forget what branch, if it's the Army or the Navy, but we don't know why. It's been kind of hush. No one knows why he was actually let go. And then basically he started forming his mafia connections when he comes back. And they're all the people that he knew and grew up with in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, which is the members of the Gambinos and that Brooklyn crime family.
I see. Now, so did the mob, because I found in an article that he claimed to be a partner in a popular Italian restaurant where he held fundraisers, including one for Patrick Kennedy in 1993. And I've read that he also co-owned Malibu, a nightclub in Scotch Plains, New Jersey. And he also was taking meetings with Peter Gaten in an effort to buy Gaten's Manhattan nightclubs, which included Tunnel and the Limelight, which I have definitely spent some time in those clubs back then.
Honey?
Who hasn't, right? But so do you think that Italian restaurant was then probably owned by the mob, right?
Yes, I believe so. And I believe, any opportunity that the mafia, especially with the way that they operated back in the day, to sort of dump money into different companies or, construction business, restaurant business. So that is probably tied to the mafia. But then at the same time, maybe you know this, at one point he becomes Wall Street. He kind of flips and he joins Wall Street. Right.
Well,
and
I think that was before from what I found, that he was working on Wall Street in the early 80s, and he didn't have a college degree, but he somehow talked his way in. And that was one of the things that the investigative journalists found out, that he spouted a lot of lies and bullshit, but there was enough of truth in them that they could maybe be believable, which is how they think that he became like a Wall Street trader. And then he became a consultant and helped clients in the insurance, construction, finance, and gambling industries, which again, very connected with sort of mob activity. And then he supposedly got into the restaurant business because from the research that I found, that's where he made a lot of his high-powered connections. Although his big one was Frank DiTommaso, who ran a very large construction firm, and he became friends with him. And he hired Larry to help him make introductions, like to the people that Larry knew. And in one of the court filings, because they went to court together later, Di Tommaso actually beat the crap out of him in 2016 and was on trial because he gave him very hardcore head injuries as well as neurological problems. But he only, he, by the time the trial was done, he only got a day for anger management, even though he beat the living shit out of Larry Ray. But back then, there was a quote that I found, and this is from that Cut article. Quote, here he is, dealing with government officials, very credible and prominent politicians. And he introduced me to Marine generals and colonels, end quote, because Larry was telling everybody that he was in the Marines. So forget his 19 days of service, which is what is all on record. He claimed he was a Marine. Oh, and he was in the Air Force in 1981. So, but he hung around and was friends with Generals Charles Pittman and retired Marine Commandant General James L. Jones, which were very high up. And some of the stories he spun around his military service, he claimed that he and Pittman, which is the General Charles Pittman, planned an operation to capture and extradite Assata Shakur from Cuba. And he also, and this is from court documents that he was telling these stories too. He also claimed that in the early 1990s, he tried to make inroads with the post-Soviet Russian economy and was even contracted with the CIA. And that he said that NATO officials had dispatched him to Moscow in 1999 to stop a bombing campaign in Kosovo. And he, in the court document, said he didn't know anything about the war, but the CIA sent him there. And when somebody challenged him on this, Larry presented a letter written on official NATO letterhead, thanking him for his, quote, efforts to ensure good communication and understanding between ourselves and the Russian leadership, end quote. And then the NATO official... Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and then you flash forward a bit, and now he's getting Gorbachev to do a photo op with Giuliani and Carrick. But that's, I guess, way after this.
Yeah, it's a little bit after this, because this is around the time where he met Larry or Bernie Carrick, who was a young NYPD detective, and Carrick had been promoted to being Mayor Rudy Giuliani's driver to the director of the New York City Department of Corrections Investigations Division. And so this is Carrick. And Carrick was, by the end, got very high up in the NYPD. So they became very good friends. And Carrick remembers that Larry was very, he said he exuded macho. He had streetwise charisma and had so many connections. And a few years later, Larry was the best man at Carrick's wedding. And again, he was just able to make friends. So the Gorbachev, which is what you were talking about, was supposedly when Larry was in Russia, because I guess he did go to Russia, he befriended Pavel Palazhenchenko, who was Mikhail Gorbachev's longtime interpreter. So in 1997, Larry and his friends Carrick, because Giuliani really wanted to meet Gorbachev. So Larry and his friends played host to Gorbachev, and he visited New York. And I guess Larry arranged security and transportation, which, by the way, was Larry's own car. So Larry drove Gorbachev around. And Larry even orchestrated a meeting between Gorbachev and Robert De Niro. And Robert De Niro remembered saying that it was really odd that this random guy who was arranging this meeting. And Larry, as a favor to Carrick, arranged Gorbachev to sit down with Giuliani. And that photographs of that meeting made national headlines. And 1 month later, Giuliani appointed Carrick commissioner of the Department of Correction.
Yeah. One hand washes the other. Both hands wash the face.
Right. And then he's in it now. So because now he's such a trusted individual, I mean, look, he's having Giuliani having meetings with Gorbachev, where when I was reading in the New York Times, and I think there was like People magazine article, people were like, why would Gorbachev sit down with Giuliani? But Giuliani's like, I want this. And Larry made it happen. So the fact that he made it happen, Carrick, now he's a commissioner. He started introducing him to a lot of his law enforcement contacts, including an FBI agent named Gary Uher. And so, of course, Larry's like, okay, so I'm going to snitch on my mafia contacts because I'm going to try to get in with these big people. So the Gary, I'm probably mispronouncing it, Uher, he took Larry on as an informant. And they were meeting a lot, like 2, 3, 4 times a week. And he was giving him the information on a pump and dump stock scheme operated by Eddie Garofalo, who was a capo in the Gambino family. And Larry said that he could give him information on the scheme. And Larry claimed that Eddie found out and put a hit on him. So the FBI agent Uher believed him, and according to FBI reports, the agency paid $10,000 for a security system to be installed in Larry's home, which is kind of like if you have a hit put on you by the mob.
Yeah. Well, what's pretty amazing also is what's pretty amazing about this whole thing also is he's informant to ultimately his own Wall Street and mafia crimes. And then when he gets
exactly, which is
just it's unbelievable. But then what happens is he starts asking. He puts pressure on Carrick. Please bail me out. Please bail me out. Like, I've hooked you up. I've done so much for you. You got to call a judge. Like, he's actually pleading with Carrick, and Carrick says no. So he kind of leaves him hanging. Like, you're doing all this.
Yeah, because I mean.
What can I do?
Well, the problem was that Larry overplayed his hand. And I think that's the problem with these personality disorder people. They can't keep it together. And so he quickly, so he worked with the FBI for a couple of years, but the FBI agent, Uher, was like, oh, this guy is just full of shit. And Larry, of course, was totally involved in this pump and dump scheme. And there's a document that said that, quote, Uher hates Ray for all of Ray's lies. And that, quote, the FBI was Larry's biggest mark, end quote. And there was a former law enforcement official said this. And by the way, in this article for The Cut, again, these two investigative journalists just did such an amazing job of putting out this article that really started this whole case. Going to say their names one more time: Ezra Marcus and James D. Walsh, man. I mean, this is like why journalists are so important in our world.
Yeah. Just took a really deep dive.
And it's interesting because when I was looking for a lot of information on this case, all of the other articles pointed to this article. So there was like 2 or 3 New York Times articles. There was a People article. Everything was ascribed to this article. These journalists just did such an amazing job getting this. So, very fun fact that the FBI agent, Uher, he did not actually comment on the original article. He ignored them. And in 2015, he worked as a bodyguard for Donald Trump.
Oh, wow.
And guess who made the introduction to Donald Trump? Why, it would be Bernie Carrick made that introduction.
Oh, of course.
Again. It's
Let's all take care of each other.
Like the New York... all take care of each other. New York construction, the mob. I mean, it's just all here.
I mean, who do you think Trump called upon to help build Trump Tower? It was like all these construction mafia people,
all these construction guys, exactly. So, I mean, it's just the way that New York works.
But then Carrick gets wrapped up. He gets, I believe, Ray gets 5 years probation, all this crazy stuff. Gets really angry with Carrick. And then Carrick eventually serves jail time for housing and mafia deals, apparently. So there's this whole thing where, like,
yes. So we were.
It's like, you're not going to help me. I'm going to stab you in the back.
Exactly. Larry screws over everybody. He is like an equal opportunity. I'm just going to mess you guys all up. So going back to that original pump and dump scheme case in March 2000, federal prosecutors in Brooklyn indicted 19 defendants, and that also included Larry. He was charged for paying a $100,000 bribe to the executive of a bond brokerage on behalf of Garofalo. But prosecutors are like, you know what? Larry did help provide some background information, but he didn't really help the investigation in any significant way. And in fact, they claimed that Larry had repeatedly lied to the FBI. Mm-hmm. So, of course, Larry's like trying to get out of here, out of this case. And so this is where a lot of these these stories from the court documents came. He pointed out to his efforts that he helped the U.S. government in other capacities. He brought the CIA back up again. He said that he had done work in Kosovo. He said that Uher had once dispatched him to Russia to lure now infamous Trump crony Felix Sater, an unindicted co-conspirator in the pump and dump scheme, back to the United States. Oh my God. Like, how is this all of a sudden connecting? He also claimed, this court documents, that he had recovered Stinger missiles off the black market for the U.S. government, something that Sater had also reportedly done. So, is Larry just essentially piggybacking on Felix Sater? But the court was like,
That's the beauty, I think, of being a con person is the beauty of being a con person is that you could sprinkle some of the truth in with a lot of the lies. There's so much Larry Ray and Bernie Madoff. Just like hurting those that you're close to, learning how to take advantage of them. Like, how can they possibly go against anything you said? Like, you're close with them. It's a lot of that is also go back to Murdoch. Like, these people form these relationships, but ultimately they just completely screw them over, and there's no regard. It's a power thing. It's narcissism. I believe, what was the acronym for on episode 1 of part 1? You mentioned the doctors who came up with. Was it PAC?
Yes. The acronym was, oh my gosh, where is it now?
Because that was really interesting. How he fits everything.
Yeah. It really does fit in. And I'm trying to find that file that I can't find. Anyway, I will come up with it in a second.
Sure. It's just cons. It's just tons of cons. But that's what's amazing is then you do sneak in these things about black market, Russia dealings. Like, it actually could be true. Like, Gorbachev was in a photo with Carrick and Giuliani. So, things like this happen. It
was the BITE model, BITE.
That's it. Yes.
Which is behavior, information, thought control, and emotional control.
That's it. And then it makes you wonder how much of his mind control and brainwashing abilities may have come from Russia, like from Russian intelligence. Maybe he was able to sit down and schmooze and find out what they do to interrogate and to, mess with people's minds, because Russia is known for doing things like that. So.
Well, of course. And then I'm kind of wondering is how did he get to Russia in the first place? Because it wasn't with the military. And I couldn't find any information of him actually being there. Obviously, he was there, but that was, again, it's like you have these little facts of him being a mover and shaker, but then there's no concrete anything, which I find fascinating in this story, that you kind of see him and the sidelines. And that was actually a quote that I think, what was it? That somebody was talking about. And I think this was also from the Cut article, that they talked about a person who knew him back in the 80s and 90s and said, quote, Larry was a chameleon. He could be a good old boy or a patriot, or he'd pull out a pipe and fake glasses and be an intellectual. He would juggle 10 different people at the same time, telling each of them one piece of a story he wanted them to know and convincing them that he wanted them to be part of his master plan. So if he's doing this with mob bosses, politicians, world leaders, military leaders, these poor kids at Sarah Lawrence did not stand a chance.
No. I mean, and the other thing is, it's like, just as, for a serial killer, the act of their heinous crimes is a rush for them, right? In most instances, and they'll have souvenirs, and it's, they can't stop themselves for the rush. And that may have been what drove Larry from, now I have this rush of being on Wall Street. Like, I fooled them. I'm here. And then he could just take it, and he keeps going. Now I'm in Russia. Like, now I'm here. I did it. Like, it's just this idea of, like, the rush of being able to just con people and with just charismatic energy. That's what's really frightening is when you meet someone that's very charismatic and outgoing, is there an ulterior motive? I don't know. And certainly in this case, by the time he gets to Sarah Lawrence, forget it. And he's coming out of jail and telling everyone, including his daughter, that, he's going to jail because of everything political. It's all political reasoning.
Right.
Why he's in jail.
Which, exactly. So because of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, but going. No, I was going to say, because next, of course, he turns on Carrick. So if we go back to his pump and dump stock case, so the conviction, of course, was inevitable because he did it. But the court was not having any of his stories. And he made, as you said before, a desperate plea to Carrick. But now, mind you, Carrick is now commissioner of the NYPD. So he's moved up in the world, and he begged him to put in a good word at the U.S. Attorney's Office and wrote to him, quote, please be there for me, end quote. And Carrick responded the next day, open quote, I would do anything for you, but in my present position, I can't intercede. Quote, I'm sure you understand, end quote. And of course, he did not understand. And he went totally crazy on Carrick and really got him back. So Larry did plead finally guilty to the securities fraud. And he, in 2003, was sentenced to 5 years probation, which to me, I find it interesting that he didn't actually go to jail for this. He got probation, but the judge, promised to throw the book at him if he violated the probation.
That's right.
And so, of course, while this was all happening, 9/11 happened, and Bernie Carrick's star really rose after 9/11 onto the world stage. Because, I mean, if you remember back then, Rudy Giuliani was like, the people's mayor all of a sudden after 9/11. And he started, Bernie Carrick started regularly appearing on TV. He was an advisor on Iraq, which again is just insane. The city renamed Manhattan's jail the Bernard B. Carrick Complex.
Oh, I didn't know that. Really?
On December 3rd, 2000, and on December 3rd, 2004, George W. Bush nominated Carrick to be Secretary of Homeland Security.
Yeah. Wow. I love the irony of Giuliani's career in New York really blossoming and blooming, and he becomes known as the person who's going to get organized crime. And he subsequently brought down a lot of the mafia. So then it's like, now you're hanging out with Larry Ray. Now you're getting the spotlight. Now, and obviously he gets tenfold, America's mayor. When that tragedy happens. But it is interesting to see how these people flip. Like, his whole mission was to bring down every crime family. brings a lot of the people down. But then you flash forward years later and a photo op, with Gorbachev, this is great. Maybe I'll run for president one year.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'll shoot for senator, it's politics and power. And
then we get the crazy Rudy Giuliani of the last 5 years with this.
Wow.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow. Not to get into politics and that, but that guy, man, wow.
Yeah.
So going back to Bernie Kerik, he, of course, is dirty as all get out. So a week later, he withdrew his nomination for the Secretary of Homeland Security, claiming that he had once employed an undocumented nanny.
I remember that. Yes.
However, the Daily News, a couple days after Kerik's withdrawal, broke a gigantic story about improprieties stemming from his relationship with Larry Ray, who was mobbed up, dirty as shit. And going into, this. However, the funny, interesting thing is this is where Larry becomes terrifying. Larry was the story's primary source in the Daily News because he never forgot that Bernie Kerik screwed him and didn't come to his defense when he was doing the pump and dump indictment. So in the Daily News, it claimed that Larry had paid for Kerik's wedding, bought Kerik $4,300 worth of furniture, gave him a customized Tiffany's police badge, and of course, this was for revenge. And Kerik was publicly humiliated. The city took his name off the jail. His affair with editor Judith Regan was made public, and he faced city, state, and federal investigations. In 2009, Bernie Kerik pleaded guilty to felony tax and false statement charges and served 3 years in prison.
Yes, and apparently the word on the street is that Larry Ray around this time, in addition to the Daily News, that he really, really hounded the media with all this character, and once again, mixing facts with fiction.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and once again, mixing facts with fiction.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I found an article, and I think it might have been in People magazine, that said that this was around the time where he kind of threw Di Tomasio under the bus too, because he said that Bernie Kerik was, and so he was cooperating with investigations into, of course, Bernie Kerik. And he gave them Frank Di Tomaso, which, if you remember from earlier in the podcast, he was his friend in the construction business that Di Tomaso had hired him to make introductions to all these big people. So he claimed that Bernie Kerik had taken illegal gifts and failed to report loans. And a lot of them were given from Di Tomaso. Supposedly, Di Tomaso did renovations on his Brooklyn apartment in the amount of about $200,000, I believe. That was quote unquote a gift.
Those tiles
which, by the way, just so everybody... That's right. So, by the way, just so everybody knows, President Donald Trump, when he was president, he pardoned Bernie Kerik, of course.
Yes, he did.
Because of course he did. because why not?
Mind you, this is the same Donald Trump. Speaking of 911, speaking of 9/11, speaking of Donald Trump, this is a guy who, first interview after the towers fell, said, "I guess this means I now have the largest property in New York City." And I was like, wow.
There you go.
There it is.
There you go. We're going deep into New York history here on this podcast, people.
Yeah. I mean, from Brooklyn to Manhattan,
into the full-on corruption of the construction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Construction, mob bosses, politicians, forget about it, man.
Yeah.
So around this time, I think Larry got pretty drunk with the power that he was able to bring down Bernie Kerik as well as he could. I mean, think about it. The guy was nominated by George W. Bush to be Secretary of Homeland Security. I mean, you know how much power Homeland Security has now. Could you imagine that guy being the secretary? Holy crap. So anyway, Larry Ray was like, yeah, I got this. And he became supposedly really malicious. And so this was around the time in 2004, his wife, Teresa, filed for divorce. And she claimed that, not she claimed, but a few months later, she had to call the police and said that Larry had hit her.
Yes.
And, when the police got there, Larry and Talia, who was then 15, claimed Teresa was abusing the children. They claimed child abuse and New Jersey's child
I beg your pardon. I was under the impression that Talia was 7.
In the cut article, it says Talia was 15 and her sister was 7. And
that's right.
The way that the article, so the way that
divorce.
So
it was a really horrible divorce.
It was a really, yes, and there was as the New Jersey's Child Welfare Department gave Larry temporary custody because of this, and then for the next several months they kept getting anonymous complaints claiming that Teresa had physically and sexually abused the girls. And Talia also accused her grandfather, cousin, and aunt of abusing her. Yeah. And Larry created websites and posted graphic accusations of child abuse against Teresa and her family. And a lot of his blogs featured letters that were supposedly written by Talia that read like journal entries. Quote, "You were the single most dangerous thing to me in my entire life." One quote, one letter says to Teresa. But you know what? The child welfare investigators found that none of the allegations were true. And this was around the time where that psychological evaluation came out of family members. This was commissioned by Teresa's lawyers. And this was where that investigator was like, Larry is completely impossible to evaluate because he is scary as shit. Do not want to deal with this man at all. Yeah. And so the report also concluded that Larry had manipulated Talia into making these allegations. And quote from the report, quote, "fit no discernible pattern ever reported to this examiner who has been evaluating families for 20 years, end quote. And this examiner found that neither of the girls were abused and that the accusation sounded rehearsed. And then Talia's sister was actually 4, not 7. And when the examiner asked if she had ever been hit by her mother, the little girl laughed and said, quote, "That's what daddy tells me to say."
Yeah, there you
end
go.
Quote.
I mean, this is grooming. He's beginning to groom Talia. Yeah. And then when you flash forward, when, he gets out, that's it all leads. You understand why she says, "Hey guys, my dad just got out of jail for political reasons. He's so cool though. You're going to really like him." I mean, by the time that she's starting to find herself and her brain's developing, she's idolizing her father because she's been trained to. She's been separated from her mom.
Yeah, I mean, she's been fully groomed. Yeah. She's, I mean, I don't think Talia ever had a chance with this kind of dad. And she was just full line and sinker. And as there was actually someone familiar with the divorce, again, coming from that cut article, was a quote, "She was his soldier," and quote, "Talia is a really loving person and she is the biggest victim of all," end quote. But, again, she was groomed. And so he spent 6 months in jail for this because he refused to hand the children over to Teresa. And he was charged with contempt and interference with custody. So this is, by the way, the first time this man has ever been in jail. I just want to let that sink in. So
So he's
Talia
been
chose to live in
probation, slap
youth
on a wrist,
shelters.
ignored.
Yeah. Just see exactly nothing else. But so Talia refused to live with her mother ever again, and she lived in youth shelters instead. So I can't imagine the psychological turmoil this girl must have gone through having a dad like that.
And if you're her mother, I mean, how it's incredible if you're the mother to have to go through that. And then again, you flash forward and you think of all the people that followed him to Manhattan, that lived with him in Sarah Lawrence. Same idea of detaching yourself from the family. Like, I think about that and I just can't imagine what that must be like to completely be disconnected from someone who's doing it because they're basically influenced to the point where they have to detach themselves from you. I mean, that's extreme power, to be able to say, Mom, Dad, like, I never want to speak with you again. It's just like, wow. And in her case, these memories are implanted early, so she's
early.
It's early.
And it's her dad. I mean, like, I just can't imagine. So, of course, Larry, and I think this is the histrionic part of his case, he now started telling everybody in jail, his daughter, conspiracy theorists, book writers, that this was a massive plot against him, orchestrated by his former friend, Bernie Kerik, who had aligned himself with his wife, which is with Larry's wife, Teresa, to get him in jail. He used family court against me. Giuliani and his whole team came after me. And he started writing all these crazy blog posts saying that the prosecutors, judges, police, federal agents, even his own lawyers were working on behalf of Bernie Kerik. And he literally sounds like he's lost his mind, claims that the former commissioner was out for revenge. And Giuliani, Bush, Dick Cheney were trying to silence Larry because he knew secrets about 9/11. So now he's plugging into like full conspiracy theorist thinking. He told a city investigator that people in mysterious vehicles had pulled up beside him and shot at his car. So everything was connected to Bernie. Exactly. So of course, again, this guy is completely unhinged. In 2006, Larry was arrested again when his then girlfriend accused him of trapping her in their apartment, pinning her down and putting his hand over her nose and mouth. And strangely enough, he made bail. And when he spoke to the detective, he said, quote, that he is currently involved in a major government investigation and that this domestic violence incident was made up to place him in a bad light. Unfortunately, this girlfriend withdrew her complaint and the case was dismissed, probably because she was terrified that he was actually going to kill her. And so...
the shocking thing is you go through all this, you con everyone, including your family. See, that's I get the thrill, but then the thrill crosses over into your own personal, private life, the close friends, your family. That's, again, it reminds me of so much. Murdoch is just like you get the trust from all these people, and including your family, and you're just conning even your family. Like, it's not enough to do it with the company. It's not enough to do it with the jail system or the federal government.
Yeah, no. And again, it's the amount of chaos and paranoia and crazy swirling around this was insane. And I think this last time that he was now he's in jail for 60 years, but right before he got to Sarah Lawrence, the reason why he was in jail was that this domestic violence arrest, federal prosecutors said that was in direct violation of his probation and the pump and dump conviction. And so the government declared him a fugitive, and U.S. Marshals spent weeks trying to find him. And they finally tracked him by a cell phone to Chen's apartment on East 93rd Street. And when 5 marshals broke down the door, they found Larry and his daughter Talia inside. They pinned him to the ground, handcuffed him. They broke his arm in the process. And according to the Washington Post, one marshal recalled, and this is, I'm quoting from the Cut article, quote, according to the Washington Post, one marshal recalled hearing Talia scream, quote, police corruption. This is because of Mayor Rudy Giuliani and Bernard Kerik, end quote.
Wow. Yeah.
And so she's in it. She is a true believer. And I think she was actually arrested as his right hand in this. I was looking to see, do you know where she is right now? Do you know if she ever went to jail? Because I know Isabella Pollock went to jail.
I don't believe his daughter ever served time. I don't know if she took a plea. She was initially going to support, just like what's her name, Isabella?
Yeah.
Is it Isabella? Yeah. So
Isabella.
Initially they were on the same page, and then last minute she said, I can't do this. Like, I'm going to serve as I'm flipping. Like, I can't. I'm not going down with my dad. Like, this is all his own doing. And Isabella winds up being the only one. I mean, again, down to the last minute in her decision to not defend her father, I'm sure it was extremely difficult for her, having gone her whole life defending him rather, to so many different people. And then apparently during the trial, he has a couple of seizures.
Oh, yes, I saw that. Yes, I saw that he was taken out by the ER. But then again, you're like, is he faking it? Because I could totally see him faking it.
Of course. Same here. He has 2 seizures. But you know what's interesting is the jury deliberated for 4 hours.
Oh, yeah. There was no question. I mean, this guy was... No, it was just no question. And, God.
I was just going to say, when in doubt, seizures help,
Right. But it didn't help him too much, because he was convicted on 15 criminal counts with charges including sex trafficking, extortion, racketeering conspiracy. After he moved into his daughter's dorm, he psychologically, physically, and sexually abused several of her classmates over the course of nearly 10 years and in 3 different states. He reportedly forced, obviously victims into prostitution, like we spoke about last time, threatened to dismember another witness, recorded, coerced, and false confessions from each admitting to crimes and offenses that they never committed. I actually found the affidavit for this trial. Between what he got from the prostitution and what he got from the different families of the victims, he got in excess of $1 million from these families and from the woman who was unfortunately, put into sex work because of him. But on top of everything else, so I always wondered where the racketeering came from. So essentially he used that his domain business to launder all of that money. So he didn't pay taxes on any of it. So he laundered the money that he was getting from the families and from the prostitution through his domain business. Yeah. And he also got some of the students, like we spoke about last week, to do work on that domain business. Extortion, which is why Isabella went to jail, because she helped him launder the money through the domain business.
She was with him until the very end. And also, it's interesting to note that the jury were shown a lot of the videos that he himself recorded of the abuse. I mean, if you're a jury member and you see that, it's pretty open and shut. And what's interesting and just so callous is how he doesn't mind that people see the video. Seemingly, he's like, "Hey, I'm going to film you guys." And if he's so worried about political following and his phone's being tapped or blah, 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 he didn't destroy anything. It's not as though he destroyed anything. In a way, he was proud. Again, these are mementos and souvenirs of his control and his power, you know?
Yeah. No, it's I mean, again, this case was just incredible because it spans such a long time too, and I think that's why the cult portion comes into this, because it's over a
Yeah.
decade that he
Yeah.
did this to these kids and he exploited them and tortured them. I mean, and again, where is Sarah Lawrence in this? Like, I was reading in one of the
Yeah.
New York Times articles that I'll have listed, there was a lot of comments from people being like, like, where was the RA? Like, where was the resident advisor? Like, he claimed that he didn't know that he was living in campus housing, which, of course, anything coming out of Larry's mouth is complete bullshit.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
like, Sarah Lawrence needs to be put on, notice as to, like, how can you let a man coming out of prison to like live in your on-campus housing?
And they received complaints,
like,
not just from students. They got it from families. They got it from parents.
But from the parents, yeah. And they did nothing. And so I think they are complicit somewhat in this
100%.
because there is no reason why a 52-year-old ex-convict man should be allowed to live in a dorm room. Like, yes, a parent can visit their child for 2-3 days, but like, he lived there for months.
Yeah.
Like, it's just that whole part of the story is so insane to me.
Yeah, me too. And it's just incredible that they could play dumb for so long. Like, let's say they had no clue, which they didn't probably. But then once you start getting, notes and letters from family and from students, to just kind of be like, I mean, is it a money thing? Is it like, well, I mean, it's like, do you look the other way? It's so weird, but I totally hold them as much responsible.
It's just the weirdest. I mean, oh my God. Like, yeah. But again, so this case, as with a lot of cults, there's a lot of deprogramming that has to happen. The victims are, outside of the ones who have gone to jail, which even those, like Isabel Pollack was a victim. Like, I know that she did terrible things, but like, her brain was completely turned into mush by this like manipulative, evil man. Yeah. And when you're 18 or 19 with obviously problems, like all of us had problems at 18 or 19. Like, we don't know, at least me, like, I didn't know my head from my ass back then. So having somebody that was so manipulative and evil.
They've offered her a lot of room to get help. They said, listen, I understand you're going to be on this trial, but like, we really need to evaluate you. Like, you definitely have some issues. And she refused. So it's just very disheartening.
Well, because think about it this way. Well, because I'm just thinking, is like, if she admits that she has these problems, then her entire worldview that he has created for her comes crashing down. I mean, I can't even imagine the fear of having your almost like reality being said, like, no, this is not the reality that you think it is. And then you have to face what you've been doing. And for a lot of, I mean, I think that's part of when they do the deprogramming for cults. That's one of the hard things, is like trying to work through the fear of having to face yourself, that shame and again, like, that very sense of self is then questioned because you have created this reality that you think is reality, and in fact it is not. It is a manipulative cult that you have been indoctrinated into. And I think, like, we'll probably do more cults because I'm just fascinated about how groupthink happens and how you can get manipulated. So, and again, we're the deviant mind. So
I do also
that is definitely deviant.
I do think it's interesting if you look at, we've been discussing everything. What boggles my mind is you get to Sarah Lawrence. How does he get from dealing with Carrick and Russia and CIA and all these like cons to now focusing on kids? Like, where does you like? That's what's so deviant to me, is like, to suddenly switch gears and take it out on young minds that are developing. They're not like adults. He's not like fully an adult or a company or, the military. He's now moved on to confusing
I had a
students.
friend. I had a listener actually talk about like, where did he get this money and where did he end up from Sarah Lawrence from all of the stuff that he was doing in New York? And I personally, my thing is that he's out. He's ratted on the mafia. He's ratted on the FBI. He's ratted on, he's completely blown up any contact he's ever had in New York City with any uppity ups, right?
Yeah.
And so he's out of prison and he needs a place to stay. Like, I literally think it's like Occam's razor. It's the simplest explanation. Whereas he's out of prison, he has his one lieutenant left, which is Talia, and he needs a place to stay. And he's like, okay, I'm going to go stay with her. And then he's like, oh, I'm back. I can manipulate. And here's this like sexy 19-year-old who's having a lot of issues because she just had a breakup. I can have some sex with her. And I think it just goes into what he knows how to do best on a much smaller and more devastating level, right? Which is personal relationships, and then because I think a lot of it has like control, right? Because if he's an informant for the FBI, then he's controlling, like he has power. He's controlling the information that he's giving between the mafia and otherwise. If he is, essentially creating contacts between Gorbachev and Giuliani, then he has control because he's the person that's making this connection happen. And so, and especially with narcissists, that's the way they see the world, is through control and manipulation. And so I think this was what he had in front of him. And he's like, all right, I'm going to do this. And then he got $1 million out of it.
Yeah.
Right.
I buy that. Absolutely. Yeah, the buck doesn't
and it
have
made
to stop
sense to me.
that.
Right. Now, where he got the original money, like, because remember in last week's episode, we were talking about the fact that when they moved, I think for winter break onto the East 93rd Street apartment.
Oh yeah, they're like
had
limos
wads of cash
and everything.
Now, yeah, so that I kind of wonder where he had the wads of cash, and I could not find what scam he had played to get those wads of cash. Like, did he take a loan from somebody? Like, where did he get that money? So that is one thing. And again, these articles are so fascinating because when I was doing research, everything went back to the cut, the New York Magazine article. I did find some New York Times articles. I did find the court documents, but finding what a normal citizen does to get money, like in the in-betweens, like before, like, so he got out of jail, he got a wad of cash, and then he started doing this thing at Sarah Lawrence College. Like, where did that wad of cash come from? And that is still a mystery. A listener asked me if we were going to be able to figure out where he got that wad of cash. And I have not been able to find that. Money. So if anybody actually knows, email us.
It could have been money waiting for him. Maybe, that could be a deal cut with mafia for not naming certain people.
From like a bank account.
It could,
right. Maybe he got from the pump and dump. Yeah.
He got from the pump and dump, was able to
maybe he had some sort of.
Or it's like some hey,
so maybe he had some
me.
Offshore account.
Yeah, here's some money. Just please don't mention me. Okay, you got it. It could have been a buy off, and then he just has the cash. Yeah. Or as you say, maybe
that could definitely be.
He could have racked money up doing public speaking events. There's always some way that someone like that's able to get money.
Right. Especially if he's that manipulative.
Yeah. And I do agree with you. It is, you start losing that power with the adults, and then you get yourself in this situation and you can keep going. It's like a little way for you to continue doing what you were doing. But my question to you is, at times his daughter and Isabella the three of them would share a bed. Do we know about any sexual abuse or sexual relations between Larry and Talia, which is something I just don't want to think about, but like they are sharing the same bed at some points.
Yes, and obviously him and Isabella have a romantic relationship. I did not see any mention of that in any of the articles that I was able to track down. So I guess nobody really knows what happened behind.
Sure.
And yeah.
And what's great is
there was no reporting, and I did not read that.
Oh no, I was just going to say at the end of the day,
it's nice to
the victims got together. Sorry, I was going to say you were going to say. I'm sorry. What were you going to say?
Yes, that the victims. No, what I was going to say that I did not like when I was reading through the court affidavit and the court documents that I was able to find. There was no mention of him abusing Talia, but because she has to this day still been one of his lieutenants, I don't think she would ever actually say if that was happening one way or the other. And obviously Isabella didn't mention anything because she's one of his lieutenants as well. So, so there was no mention of that. And, again, it goes to say that the fact, like we said last week, that this story would have never come out to authorities' attention if it wasn't for the victims having the courage to talk to these journalists. I mean, let's talk about journalism and the importance of a free press again, because Daniel Barban-Levin came up to these journalists and says, I have a story for you. And everything started with this. Like, this is why this man is not in circulation anymore and has 60 years in jail, is because of their courage to talk to journalists, and journalists being so good that they were able to dig into the story and find out all the stuff and get it published. I mean, this was, and it was fascinating to actually see how everything stemmed from this story. Like I did not go to journalism school. I was a former architect, but it was interesting to see that this was completely referenced. Like, there was like little sweetening here and there, but everything that I read pointed back to this article. So this article started it all.
And the documentary that's out about this whole case, they too mention that article quite often. And they interview, I believe, I don't know if both, but one of the journalists of that article. I mean, a lot of the times it's not even, investigative journalism just really helps stop these deviant minds and just like exposes, there's like a drive that is shared, I believe, with certain law enforcement, just, I just believe a good investigative journalist will share that same drive as a detective or a sergeant really wanting to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah.
But
to put this out into the light.
Who knows how long this would have kept going?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Which is just, again, mind-boggling. And well, because again, this is one of those people that will never stop. I mean, this is, that's narcissistic personality disorder is one of the hardest mental disorders they say it's one of the few mental disorders that there's no cure for. Like, you can't get better from it. Like, it is what it is, and stay as far away from it as you can. A lot of serial killers have narcissistic personality disorder. God forbid one of your therapists has it. Like, I've heard stories about therapists just doing so much damage to their clients because they have narcissistic personality disorder. It's an ugly one. But the documentary series that I
was just going to say, maybe one day they'll come up with a medication that's it just helps people become humble. It's like you take it if you're narcissistic, it helps.
Right. or like rewire your brain somehow. So the documentary series that we've mentioned about, and I will do show notes. I think I owe show notes for the last 2 episodes, so I'll try to get them up this weekend. But the Hulu, it's on Hulu. The docuseries is called Stolen Youth: Inside the Cult of Sarah Lawrence. And there's also an entire, I think, podcast on this case from Law and Crime, which is the Devil in the Dorm podcast, which was fascinating to listen to as well. Stolen Youth has a lot of court footage as well as the actual footage, correct? So if you're interested in any of that, definitely check out that docuseries. And so that's it for this. Larry Ray is in jail for 60 years.
I have one quick question for you. Do you think that he's continuing to do this in jail? Do you think he's trying to?
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
With other inmates just being like, listen, man, I can help you. It's all your parents' fault. Right?
Yep. It's all. It's exactly. Yes. He is not safe unless, of course, nobody's safe from this man unless, of course, he's in solitary confinement, which I know is cruel and unusual punishment. And I don't know if they do that anymore, but I'm not. I don't know, but I know. Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is him. This is what he will do for the rest of his life. So, and by the way, like if you see pictures of this guy, like it still blows my mind not to be.
I know.
He's creepy.
I mean, as we discussed in part 1, he's a creepy, chubby looking guy. And it's
like,
wow. And even the younger pictures of him, there's something about him that's you don't trust.
It's just creepy.
It's creepy.
It's just,
it's
oh
really
my
creepy.
gosh. It's creepy. Anyway, so that is Larry Ray and the Sarah Lawrence cult, sex cult. Thank you for joining us on this, and not sure what the next episode is going to be. Probably something to do with murder because we like those. Haven't read a couple. We'll see.
Discovered things.
We like the murders. And we do actually have some updates on the Brian Kohberger case as well as the Alex Murdaugh case, like what you had mentioned before about Buster.
Yes,
and how they opened up the case. Buster, and how they opened up the case of
Kickstarter or some charity organization has raised enough money to for the Smith family to exhume Stephen's body.
That's amazing. So
it's happening, which is great.
Have a feeling there's a story. Yeah, it's great.
Even if
Buster will end up in jail.
But even if it's not Buster,
that should be that case. They should find out who did it and what happened. He needs justice, and it sounds like, but it's totally Buster. It has to be Buster. Anyway, so have a great week, and thanks for listening to The Deviant Mind. This episode was sponsored by The Creek Killer, Book 1 in the Harriet Harper thriller series written by me, Dominika Best. What would you do if you read The Police Found Your Body in a Creek? Find out in The Creek Killer, available on Amazon. Thank you for joining me and listening to this episode. If you like my show, please give me a rating and review. It helps other listeners find this podcast. Follow Dominika Best Presents The Deviant Mind wherever you listen to your podcasts. Visit thebeststorytellingnetwork.com, where you'll find show notes, my books, links to social media, and much more. Join my Patreon for special subscriber perks, like 2 extra exclusive episodes a month and a Q&A with me at patreon.com/The Deviant Mind Podcast. Until next time.